All right, so we're rendering this dynamic array of movies here in this Li right here. Now there's a there's the new version of JavaScript allows us to use a much more terse, right, a much more abbreviated syntax, which I'd like to introduce to you. Before I do that, notice that this movie, the math function doesn't only pass the each element as it iterates. It also passes an optional index attribute, right? And this index tells us which where in the loop are we, right? So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. We could use that index as a unique identifier as well, right? Because we know that it's unique within this context. It doesn't have to be unique in the entire component. It needs to be unique within this particular context, right? So that works. So let me show you a much more terse, much more abbreviated version of this, right? So instead of using the classical legacy function syntax here, first of all, notice that this function has no name, right? It's oftentimes referred to as a anonymous function, right? Sometimes it's also referred to as a lambda function. Yes. Yes, we can change it. Not from right here, but yes, we'll update it. Certainly, we can change the state. Yeah, yeah, we'll see how to do that. I'm sorry. You would have to have a function that does that, and then you maybe have a button that calls that function and then modifies the state, and it would re-render. Whenever you modify the state, React will do a comparison of the resulting state. If it changed, then it will issue a re-rendering, right? And it will compare the UI that is rendered with the new UI that it would render. If there are any differences, then it would actually update the user interface. Otherwise, it would just not change it, right? It has a whole bunch of optimizations. It's very, very expensive to actually render something on the browser. So it's much faster running it on the JavaScript and determining all these optimizations. So yeah, it has a lot of optimizations that yeah, we won't get into, not in this class anyway. So let me just show you this new syntax. So instead of using this legacy syntax, what we'll do is that we'll remove this function, right? And instead we'll use what is called the arrow function, right? The arrow notation, right? This is identical, right, to what we just had. It just replaces the long word function with just 2 characters, right? And you have exactly the same thing. So if you render, notice that we have exactly the same thing. A couple other things here. This return, if you're only returning one thing, right, and that's the only thing you're doing in the function, right? This the return is optional. The return is optional. We can remove the return, okay, and just remove the curly brackets. And now this li is what it's called. It's a implied return. This li is an implied return, right? It's whatever the function evaluates to, right? And it returns it to whoever called this. Does that make sense? Right. So if we go back, notice that it renders exactly the same thing. Notice that this is much more terse and easier to read. Also, if the notice that we originally had this instead of the index, we had movie here, right? We had movie.title, which could have worked, right? If we have the IMDb, we could just use this unique identifier. And so that's even smaller. And there's an additional conversion here that we can do is that if you only have one parameter that goes into your function, then the parentheses is optional. You don't need the parentheses. Okay. So notice that we have reduced quite a bit, the verbose syntax into something that is much smaller and perhaps easier to read. Everybody okay? Right, I'm going to be using this syntax from now on. Right, it's much more terse. It's much faster to write. and it renders exactly the same thing. Everybody good?